Moment of silence.
Greetings, diners, and welcome to another edition of the Collapse Cafe here on the Doomstead Diner. Today I am joined by several old friends going across my screen from left to right. I'm not sure it will be the same on your screen, but we're visited by Gail Tverberg. Gail runs the blog Our Finite World, and she is an actuary or former actuary who has been concerned with the issues of peak oil and energy depletion for quite some time. Next to her is my good friend and co-host, Monsta666 Ibrahim, and he lives in the UK. He's currently working in the banking business, and also has been a long time follower of the resource depletion issues around the world. And he joins me on our blog, which is the Doomstead Diner. Next across is Steve Ludlam. Steve is also known as Steve from Virginia, and he runs the blog Economic Undertow, which has been covering the monetary end of collapse here for quite a number of years. I've been following Steve since before I set up the diner, and made a nuisance of myself on his blog in the commentary on numerous occasions. And after him is Hugo Bardi. Hugo is a professor of physical chemistry in Italy, and he runs the blog Resource Crisis, formerly of the name Cassandra's Legacy, which he renamed, but the URL still says Cassandra's Legacy. And it's hosted on Blogspot. And the rest of us, I think, have WordPress blogs. Okay. Anyway, let's get on to this. Oh, just one other note of interest for followers of the Collapse Cafe. You'll notice that I no longer have the lovely background of the cafe that I was doing these shows from before. I now have my own broadband internet, so I am running them from home, and there will be less distracting noise, but I do miss the ambiance that the old cafe brought to the show. But anyway, change is good, right? And we can talk about this in some peace and quiet. So let's start out here with Steve. Steve identified the effect known as, he refers to as the triangle of doom, which is a joining or a merging of what price is affordable for consumers in oil versus what price of production is. And he more or less pegged the end of 2014, 2015 is when things would come to a head. So Steve, you want to tell us a little bit about what your epiphany was back there in October of 2012 and how you really saw this coming down the pipe at that time?
Okay, well, thanks. Thanks, first of all, for asking me to be here, and it's nice to see all of you guys again.
Good seeing you, Steve, too.
I'm honored to be here.
Well, we all get our 15 minutes of fame, right? That's what Andy Warhol said. So
I'm working on mine now.
This is your 15 minutes, yeah. So use it well. Tell us about triangle.
The epiphany is very simple. As oil shortages don't make people richer; they make them poorer. And the issues of 2008 and 2009 is what was happening is an on-running shortage of petroleum. It started actually earlier, but came to a head in 2008 when the price went up to $147 a barrel. And actual physical production of crude oil leveled off in 2005. And despite a huge amount of money being thrown at oil production since 2005, the best the industry has managed to do is maintain a level rate of extraction. So this is, in a growing world, in a world with growing economies, this is a shortage. I mean, relatively speaking, it's a shortage. And shortages don't make people richer, it makes them poorer. So we have a general impoverishment of consumers, not just in the United States, but everywhere around the world. It's kind of accumulating process. And at the end of the day, you have the inability to afford the high prices that the oil drillers need to get their material out of the ground. And we've really reached a point right now where what the oil drillers need is different from what the customers are able to afford. And that's really the bottom line. It's not that the customers can't afford it by way of labor. They can't borrow it from the finance system. The finance system is insolvent. And there's nobody to really pick up the tab. So it's something that's been building for a while. There's no reason why it's not going to continue into the future, because, again, shortages don't make people richer. And even with all the noise in the fuel industry, there's still 90 million barrels a day of being extracted, and it's gone forever. And 90 million barrels tomorrow, and 90 million barrels a day after, and that number is going to decline, and there's going to be fewer people that are going to afford to extract any oil at all. That's really the bottom line. It's what I call conservation by other means. People won't conserve it, the resources voluntarily, then kind of like backward loop. If the backward loop is going to do the job for us.
Sure. Well, let's look at that conservation by other means idea and the price idea. I was talking with Gail Tverberg a little bit earlier, pre-broadcast, about what the expectations in price were as far as oil was concerned, and that many people, if not most people in the peak oil community, expected prices to rise, but that does not seem to be the case, or seem to be the problem right now. It seems to be crashing oil prices. Now, last time I checked, down somewhere around $77 a barrel for West Texas Intermediate. So, Gail, you want to tell us a little bit about expectations, price history in oil, and how you view the situation as it's progressing here?
Well, I think historically the peak oil community has talked quite a bit about rising prices. They talk about, that it's going to cost more and more to extract the oil, and then somehow or other they jump from that, seeing that, to saying, well, the price of oil is going to have to go up because it's going to cost more to extract it, and because the price is high, then we can go to renewables and everything will be happy and we'll live happily ever after. But I don't think that story is really the right story. I think what happens is that the price goes up and that people become less able to afford it, and it really feeds back through the wage system. I think of it as sort of a networked economy. And what you think of as being on one side, which is the cost side, works through over to the wage side. So you've got both sides connected together. And as you have high prices, it indirectly leads to lower wages. And it's the lower wages, and the fact that young people can't find good jobs that gets to be your big problem.
Well, and that aspect of how the money is flowing or not flowing through the economy in the area of jobs is probably the most important. And over in Europe and Italy, the unemployment rates amongst the young people is well into the teens, if not up above 20% these days. And even here in the United States, the unemployment numbers are horribly underreported. What is done to mask that is people are just dumped off the working population, and this keeps our unemployment numbers down. But this availability of credit is something that I think a lot of people don't really understand. They say, oh, well, people don't buy gasoline on credit. They buy it with money they earn. If they're buying it on their credit cards, that's big trouble, right? But I think what people don't understand is that all the money is credit, all your wages and all the rest of it. Somebody somewhere had to borrow that money for it to ever come into existence. So if if somebody is not borrowing money or does not have access to credit, your jobs are going to start disappearing because there's no money in the system to pay you. Just to get back to this problem, or the growing problems in Europe, which seem to be a canary in the coal mine here, and progressing further along quicker in the collapse highway. I'd like Hugo to fill us in. He was recently at the European Parliament presenting there on the issues of energy availability in Europe, energy security. Hugo, you want to tell us what's going on in Europe? Tell us about your experiences over at the European Parliament and so forth.
Well, it's I think Europe is not so different than anywhere else. It's everywhere we have this tremendous difficulty in understanding what's going on. I mean, if you put some thought on the issue, as Gail and Steve said, it is obvious. We have been saying this many times, and it is not even new. The fact that the prices cannot go too high, because otherwise you destroy the demand for oil, or they cannot go too low, because otherwise you cannot finance extraction and production. So it's reasonably easy, but it is very, very difficult to have people understand what is the problem. So I can tell you that yesterday there was an article in a major newspaper in Italy, and they said, oh, it was titled "The Gift from the Sheikhs." So it seems it was titled in such a way, they say, you know, these Arabs, the sheikhs, they are making us a gift in lowering the price of oil. They don't understand that it's one of those gifts that you really would not want to have sometimes. And so the problem is mainly a problem of perception. We are going to these oscillations up and down, and then as Steve has shown in his blog, we're going to converge into something that eventually has to crash. And you see, my experience a few days ago, I was invited to give a presentation to the European Parliament, not the whole Parliament, but a good number of members of Parliament came to listen to me and others. And you have this sensation of the extreme difficulty of passing even slightly more complex than usual messages, because with all the goodwill, it takes just a little while, a little bit of understanding, because you have to think about that, because people tend to think very simply in binary terms, either good or bad, high prices, low prices. Let me show you something, if you allow me. Okay, let me zoom in. This is a mousetrap. A mousetrap, yes. Okay, this is a typical binary system. As you can see, it's either on or off. So it's like Mr. Schlesinger, the former Secretary of State of the United States, said, it's people tend to think in two ways, either complacency or panic. So right now the trap is set to complacency. Nothing is happening. You know, you are a mouse. You think, well, what's wrong with that? It's so simple. No, nothing is going to happen, right? And then you go touch it, and bang, it is gone. And it's very difficult to have people reason in ways which are different than complacency or panic. So it's a big problem we have, and I think we will suffer the consequences. There is very little we can do. We are trying to explain how things are, what's happening, but people still tend to try to find somebody to blame, and you know, Roger, the people who predicted a catastrophe, they're usually the ones blamed for it. So Roger, be careful with your collapse cafe, because you will be
it's all my fault
for everything.
The collapsing ruble, collapsing yen.
That crazy guy was.
So
I caused it all.
The chief conspirator.
Yeah.
All right, so that was my experience. It's very difficult to pass the message, even at somehow high levels. Not because people are stupid, absolutely not, but because they tend to reason in a certain way, which is traditional, and the way of the media, the way of the newspapers, the way of normal way of managing these kind of things.
Well, one thing is, the aspect of denialism, which I, still run into all the time on the diner. You got people showing up who not only deny that collapse is coming in the future, they deny that that we're even facing anything more than typical problems. Oh, war! There's always wars. Prices always rise, and this, that, and the other thing. Which obviously is opposite from what's happening, at least with the oil market. But in food and other things, other necessities, prices continue to rise. So many people, even with all the evidence ongoing around the world that you have significant problems, and problems which are growing, and reaching that stage in the binary where the mousetrap flips, they deny that there's any problem at all, and it's business as usual. Oh, I just go out to the restaurant and enjoy a nice dinner with my wife and all the rest. I've got people on the diner who are saying this sort of stuff all the time because the collapse has not hit them yet. It's a recession when someone else loses their job, and it's a depression when you lose your job, and that's the old saying. But we see a lot of effects here going on besides the decreasing price in oil on the markets. We also see currency issues going on, and we have a couple of currencies, more than a couple, when you include many of the third world country currencies, which are really in crisis, but major currencies of the yen and the euro, which are in the process of tumbling. And mentioned also here is the ruble. I want to try to get everybody's feelings about what's going to go on with the different currencies over time here, how that's going to play out. There's a constant discussion in the blogosphere about whether we're going to see either a hyperinflationary event, Weimar style, at some point, or deflationary events. So where is the currency situation going to go? Steve, you want to start us off with that one also?
Well, it's I've got a 25-word or less answer for that, because you got currency markets, you got central banks, you have use of currency as collateral in other countries, and you also have trade flows, carry trade, and also the relationship between petroleum and currency. You have preferred currency, like the dollar right now is a preferred currency to purchase petroleum. And one reason, of course, is the United States is the third largest oil producer and a large producer of natural gas. Obviously, any petroleum products that are sold here are paid in dollars. But all of these things interact. You got the currency traders want to make money, and the only way they can make money is if different currency pairs fluctuate. So, and they can manipulate the market. In fact, they just this is just an article not too long ago that the big banks in Europe and in the United States agreed. They didn't do anything wrong, but they manipulated the foreign exchange market. So it's a big market. It's a $5 trillion a day market. So there's effect on currency pairs in the foreign exchange market. There's international trade. And another big factor is dollar is a collateral for currencies around the world. And carry traders move and manufacturers back and forth. Dollars go back and forth. The dollar is collateral for other currencies, including the ruble. And if people want to get their hands on dollars, they don't like the ruble, well, they'll pay any price in ruble to get the dollar. So then you follow down that road, then you have hyperinflation. You also have it in Venezuela, and then you have problems in the Middle East. They all have dollars and they're being recirculated. The whole thing is a big giant furball, and it's hard to make sense of it. Some currencies are going down, but other currencies like the dollar are going up and becoming very strong. My guess is over time the dollar will become the dominating, at least for the intermediate term, the dominating currency in the world, just because the United States isn't going out of business.
Well, not going out of business yet.
Not gone out of business yet. So, they're good for a little while, and, then we'll see what happens next. I mean, you got the euro problem is strictly a management problem. I think the euro problem could be solved, but, the way the thing was structured to begin with, the people can't get around it. They don't really have any, government. The European Union and the central bank and Germany, they're all kind of at odds with each other. The European Union will come up with some kind of program that they're going to solve the euro problem, and then Germany says no, and then somebody in Brussels says something else, and the next thing you know, it's like everything's back at square one, and then the banks are all crooked, governments in Spain are crooked. It's like, what do you do? I mean, it's like nobody really has any clear path out of this mess that is caused by just these chaotic, and it all focuses on energy, because the energy is what's happening is energy is capital. So if your capital is depleted, your purchasing power is depleted. All currencies are purchasing power claims against capital. So what happens is you use up your capital, eventually you've got nothing to purchase. You may have a lot of quote-unquote money, but what are you going to use the money for? You can't purchase it. It doesn't exist anymore. So, we kind of create a gigantic problem for ourselves, and we're like headless chickens running around trying to figure out what to do about it. But nobody listens to, like the people here on the diner. We're on the fringe. It's like Professor Barty gets to speak to the European, Parliament, but the rest of us,
Well, we try and we get our message out to a few people here and there. I know Gail has a pretty decent following over there on Our Finite World. One thing, guys, I got to say is my screen has froze up here, and I'm not sure that I can control the camera anymore. I can't control the camera right now. I can't seem to move it off of Steve. Or at least it's frozen on Steve.
You're fine. There's Gail.
You're seeing me while I talk. Well, I think it's running on automatic, so we'll keep going on here, and we'll just have to see how it turns out. But I'm not seeing live pictures of anybody right now. I'm just seeing still images. Gail, you want to talk about the currency problem and the financial aspect of this, how it's playing out in the various markets around the world, and where you see things going with the dollar and yen, euro, etc.?
Well, I think one of the big aspects about the dollar being relatively higher and some of the others being relatively lower is to the extent that these other countries have dollar-denominated debt. There's a big problem. I know I was reading about Russia and Rosneft. Anyhow, they're a big oil company, and with the drop in the euro and the drop in the price of oil, they were coming out close to a wash with the drop in the oil prices. But the problem is that they've got some debt that is dollar denominated, and it's going to be very difficult to pay the dollar denominated debt. And I think this is the issue that you run into with the emerging markets around the world too. With the value of their currencies dropping, it becomes very hard to pay dollar-denominated debt. So this is the one reason you can't have these currencies dropping so much without getting into a financial crisis. At least it seems to me.
Well, the big question as far as a financial crisis in that dollar-denominated debt is how does it affect the too-big-to-fail banks, and when does it become recognized that in fact these countries are never going to be able to pay off their debt, that the debt is in fact irredeemable debt, as almost all of our debt is, student loans and mortgages and all the rest of this stuff that in theory someday will be paid off, really is not going to be paid off. And that's the big question. When does the house of cards come tumbling down? Because people actually recognize the fact that that the debt can't be paid off. Right now, it just gets rolled over and rolled over and rolled over, and the Federal Reserve Bank, the European Central Bank, the Japanese Bank of Japan, People's Bank of China, all these central banks keep issuing out ever larger amounts of debt, which people call money printing, and
Yeah.
this money goes into the reserves
Central
of.
banks don't print money.
Okay, this I knew Steve was going to come in with that. What I said was that people say that it's printing money. I didn't say that it's printing money.
Okay.
I was very careful there, Steve. And but there, the one thing you can say is that in terms of notional money in existence, there's lots of it. Trillions and trillions of dollars, quadrillions probably, when you start to talk about things like derivatives and the rest of that. And all this notional money is being traded around out there. The question is, when does it become realized that, in fact, this is a bunch of mathematical nonsense and has no bearing or no relationship to reality? Steve, you want to, since that is your area, your bailiwick, you want to talk a little bit about this money creation business and how central banks produce money
Well,
and how it gets its value?
finance produces, the finance industry, the banks produce their own money. They don't need any help from anybody to lend money to each other. It's basically what most of the money is the purpose of the banks is to lend money to other banks, and then money is used to buy securities that are held by the banks. So it's very incestuous. And, but what the central bank does is it controls the interest rate. If they're, if they're lending, in other words, if they're swapping with the other banks and they're taking on their collateral, then they can price the collateral, and they do a good job of pushing the price of money down to zero, as close to zero as possible. If you look, like longer-term German bonds or even Japanese bonds, I mean, both of these countries, Japan is insolvent, but their long-term debt is very, very inexpensive. And I think my theory is that the reason that central banks are doing this is to make it easier for the petroleum companies to borrow at almost zero money cost, so that they can, finance extracting this more expensive oil out of the ground. Part of the petroleum industry Ponzi scheme. Wall Street is a component because they have their security, which is collateral, and they get low-cost money from finance. Interest rates are manipulated by the central bank, so it's a subsidy to the energy business. So you can't keep keep all of our wonderful cars going in circles from gas stations.
Well, the close relationship between the oil and energy industry and the banking industry, of course, should be well known by people. Standard Oil was founded by one of the original Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller, and that same Rockefeller also was one of the founders of what used to be Chase Manhattan Bank, is now J.P. Morgan Chase, and this relationship between the energy industry and the oil extraction industry and the money creation industry and finance is very incestuous, no doubt about that. Hugo, in terms of the finance system over in Europe, where do you see the euro going? And you've got the European Central Bank seemingly torn apart. On the one hand, Super Mario Draghi wants to do whatever it takes, print euros, hand out euros, loan euros, whatever you want to call it, to keep the system floating there. But then on the other hand, you have what are known as hawks at the Bundesbank, who want to keep their money system, tight from hyperinflating and so forth. Where do you see things going in Europe as far as who's going to win the day? And do you foresee the possibility of local currencies, the lira, coming back, etc.?
Good question. Roger, who's going to win? I have no idea, but what I can report from Europe is that there seems to be developing a consensus that the euro is not such a good idea. I don't mean that I agree with this idea, but I see it growing very, very strongly. It has been sort of dormant for a while, but then during the last crisis, a lot of people have been saying aloud, okay, it is all a fault of the euro, we got to get rid of the euro, and then everything will be back to normal as it used to be. I have strong doubts about this interpretation, but I see it very, very powerful, and I'm afraid that when an idea starts getting so much traction, and then it's very difficult to stop it. I think we are going to see a collapse of the euro in a not too remote future, despite all the effort of Super Mario Dragon, as you said, to keep it alive. Whether it will be a good thing or bad, I don't know. I'm sure in that case, if some countries of Europe go back to their original currency before the euro, like Italy had the lira, well, then we will see inflation back with a vengeance, like at the time of the Weimar Republic. We will see things changing a lot. On the other hand, you know, when a situation gets so locked as it is now, with so many problems, a good burst of inflation may actually not be such a very, very bad thing, because it destroys a lot of wealth. But in history, countries could rebound after experiencing such a bad period. So these are interesting times, as the Chinese said. You know, the Chinese malediction: "May you live in interesting times," and we are.
Well, we definitely do seem to be living in interesting times. And then one of those questions, you know, about rebounding and you know, where things will go from here after the crash, if you will, whether that crash ends up being hyperinflationary, deflationary, or whatever. But you know, what's coming down the pipe in the future, and how will societies handle this sort of stuff? And I know Gail concerns herself with those questions quite a bit on Our Finite World. So Gail, just give us some of your thoughts on how you think things are going to play out after the crash, if you will, once the realization has come that these are things we can't afford. Where do you think things will go in the long term?
Well, I think the direction we're headed right now is deflationary. You know, unless somebody can figure out a way to print some more money, but I think then everything would be tied together still with the deflation coming into it. I was just going to say what happens is that the people in the people in the I'm losing my train of thought here. Just a second, Stephen. Could you use the other? Well,
Steve always has something to say about.
I was just we have anyhow things going on at the house here.
So you were just talking about where you're seeing the deflationary trend move along.
What's happened is that commodities in general have been deflating in price since about 2011. That we've seen gold price deflation, coal prices have been going down. There have been quite a few of the metals that have been going down. You know, what we're seeing looks like, you know, all of this quantitative easing came along in 2008 and it pumped up prices from the very low level they were at the end of 2008. But once it finished pumping up at the end of 2008, it didn't, you know, it was sort of like it didn't quite hold. And so gradually what we've been seeing is these commodity prices deflating, and it's finally pushed over to the oil side as well in the deflation. And what it looks like is everything is kind of falling down. It's tumbling down as we're finding it harder to, well, if not to pay back debt, to keep adding to debt. you have to have really wages rising to keep adding to debt. Otherwise, you end up with your debt being higher and higher multiples of wages, whether or not it's higher multiples of other things.
One of the questions that bothers me, or I wonder about, is that aspect of wages. And of course, we've had the deflationary episodes in the past. And we had the oil embargo back in the 70s that caused a lot of problems. But somehow, in all the previous crises, money was pushed back into the system in some way, and then made its way out there, produced more jobs, et cetera, et cetera. But in this particular occasion, it doesn't seem like any of the money is making it out into the real economy to inflate wages and to create some more jobs and so forth. Why? Just some thoughts, if anybody has any. Why, in this particular occasion, are the money powers unable to get the debt out into the public and circulating so that we can have more jobs and the central banks can fulfill their responsibility of full employment and low inflation? Or that's what they're supposed to do anyway. Anybody have any thoughts on why it's not moving out this time?
I think one of the primary reasons why it's a lot harder to shift money into the real economy, as it were, is because the means of getting a return for your investment seem a lot slimmer than in times past. And usually there was some industry or something you could put your money in and you could be guaranteed a good percentage, like 5% or more. Whereas these days, it's becoming increasingly difficult to find that kind of yield. So I think that's why there's been less investment in various industries and in the past, because people can't really see a return on their investment and they're more hesitant. I think that's the primary thing. And the second thing is, because of that, corporations, if they want to make money, they can't expand their market so much, so it's just about cost cutting. So what they do, they will automate a lot of jobs or they will offshore them, but it's all about cost cutting to raise the profit line. So I think that's one reason why you're getting less investment and at the same time meager job growth and stagnant wages. I think that's my take on it anyway.
Oh, I think that definitely has a lot to do with it. I think also, not looked at so carefully is the demographic changes, the aging of the population. And this definitely causes serious problems in Europe and in Japan, where you've got lots of retirees and people at that end, and not a base of people to support those retirees. And so that aspect of the financial pyramid seems to have inverted and become unsupportable now. So I think demographics have a lot to do with it. And in terms of the real world, one of the issues in Japan is because their population is declining and there's fewer household formation and so forth, they actually have an oversupply of real estate that's just only going to get bigger. And so, how do you prop up the prices? Well, let's talk about demolition of real estate. And that's sort of reminds me of the Great Depression era idea that they could prop up milk prices by pouring milk down the toilet, or down the sewers and so forth. And you could prop up meat prices by just killing a lot of cows and burying them instead of selling them to poor people or giving them away. This whole aspect of trying to maintain the monetary system by artificially making scarcities is one of the more interesting effects of a monetary system. Anybody got more thoughts on that, Steve?
Well, you've got really two categories of jobs. You have farmers, and then you have everybody else. Everybody else is basically energy wasters. All of these different jobs are contriving different ways to consume energy, and the consumption process is collateral for all of this lending, all these hundreds of trillions of dollars in loans. So there's really no investment anywhere in that system at all. I mean, even agriculture is becoming more energy intensive, or at least it has in the past 25 years. So it's more of an industrial process rather than a art. And but at least with agriculture, you get a product at the end of the year. You get a harvest. You get a harvest every year if you're a decent farmer. If you're an energy waster, at the end of the year, you use your year's allotment of energy. You have to get another allotment the following year. You have to keep getting more energy. There's more people. We have a population problem, but there's more people. More people want consumer goods. More people want luxury jobs, and these jobs consume huge amounts of energy. Problem as we started this discussion is we're having what amounts to an energy shortage. In other words, the demand increases all the time. Every time a person is born, they're born with a demand for a refrigerator, a flat screen TV, air conditioning, and a brand new SUV, a big house in the suburbs. Put all this stuff in. So the demand is there, but the supply can't keep up. And since the supply can't keep up, the relationship between supply and demand, effectively we have a shortage. So the outcome is that people are poor. When they're poor, there's no such thing as an investment. All investment is free lunch. You know, I put my money, I put $100,000 in some kind of company stock, and they're going to give me a dividend, or the company is going to be worth more in a number of years than I can sell at a profit. Well, that profit is a free lunch. You know, it's not like I've dug a hole someplace in order to get basically, that part is going back. We just can't afford it. You know, we can't afford the free lunches for the capitalists. We can't afford the job for the working people. We can't afford high prices for oil. So we're stuck with a little tiny bit of low-priced oil we have left over, and that's going fast. So you know, it's not only that, we don't have a really good climate anymore, and water supplies are diminishing. There's just a wide range of all these things. They're all basically the same problem. We can't control our urge to reproduce, and we can't control our appetite. You just keep wanting more, and it's like there's less for us. And so that's where the denial comes in.
Well, and it definitely looks as though the less in the future for everybody is one of the more likely scenarios, and one wonders how things are going to go on the population level and other things. Guys, here's the thing. I'm going to give you each opportunity to maybe close here on this broadcast, and I am very concerned at this point with my frozen screen as to whether I'm going to actually be able to make this stop the broadcast and produce the video out of it, because I don't know if the stop broadcast button is going to work. And so I'm concerned that our whole adventure here we will not get a broadcast out of it. We'll see what happens. But anyway, let's just tie it up here for this Sunday. Let's go first with Hugo. Here's Steve. I'm going to have that one as your closing comment. Steve, you want to Hugo, you want to tell us what you see coming down the pipe here in the next couple of months?
Well, yes, I think I would take a little bit of a long view in showing you this book. It's a book about Sumerian poetry. It was written 4,000 years ago by a poetess, a lady called Enheduanna, and he wrote so long ago, but I discovered by reading this book that they had already invented money 4,000 years ago. And that's very interesting because you see, I think they had the same problems we have now, wars and economic problems, and eventually they destroy themselves by over-exploiting the land. So, you know, these things always happen and have been happening during the whole history of humankind. And so I think we had to take it with some philosophy. And whatever it happens, it will happen because it had to happen.
And I think that that cyclical nature in this business occurring over and over again is definitely a big part of what's going on, and it's of course hard to be part of a collapsing civilization, but that doesn't mean that there won't be something on the other side of that either. Gail, you want to give us your final thoughts on where we're going and how it's going to all turn out, either short term or long term?
Well, I think what we may be seeing is more debt defaults. And I think one of the places that we didn't touch on today was just what's going to happen in the U.S. I think that there may be some of these smaller companies that may find themselves having trouble meeting their debt repayment if the or being able to borrow more if the price of oil stays too low. But I think we also may have other situations elsewhere in the world, maybe not just on oil, but on coal and on metals and other such things, where we're seeing debt defaults, and also with the emerging markets not being able to repay debt if the value of their currencies drop too low.
Well, the collapse of the debt market, I think, is the uh, big one that we all have to watch. That's money makes the world go round, and uh, what is happening there is sort of a leading indicator as to how things are going to go for all of us. It does seem like more war is in the offing. We've got ongoing wars down in the Middle East, of course, and there's a lot of pushing and shoving now between the Russians and NATO. So this aspect of collapse also seems to be part of the game that we're going to have to deal with. We will continue to observe these phenomenon on our various blogs, our Finite World, Resource Crisis, and the Doomstead Diner, and we will be back to talk with you some more in the future with these guests and others about the ongoing collapse of industrial civilization. And that's all the doom, this time until next time, here on the Doomstead Diner. And now, can I stop?